All right, today we're going to be talking about the fate of lactate as our cap number 2. We're just going to dive right in. So first off, we know that all energy systems essentially start off with glycolysis, which is using glucose to produce ATP for energy. This can occur aerobically and anaerobically. When it occurs aerobically, the glucose produces 2-pyruvate, which then kind of convert ATP. When it occurs anaerobically, those 2-pyruvate then convert into 2-lactate, and those 2-lactate get pushed into the bloodstream. This can occur for about 1 to 3 minutes before the Cori cycle kind of kicks in and decides that they have to do something with the lactate in the blood. The lactate in the blood then gets transported over to the liver, where it goes through the opposite cycle of glycolysis, which is gluconeogenesis. It converts those 2-lactate back into 2-pyruvate to then produce glucose again. And then the glucose can then be pumped back into the bloodstream and back to those muscles where it can be used as fuel. So it shows, and that cycle can begin again with exercise. This does occur during strenuous activity. It produces energy anaerobically, so in the absence of oxygen, and this system cannot continue forever. When the lactate begins to accumulate, it is mainly due to hydrogen ions accumulating, and the system isn't able to keep up, so an enzyme, lactate dehydrogenase, can't work as fast, and the lactate builds up. This causes the pH in the blood to increase, and it causes the speed and the force of the contractions to decrease. The point at which the blood lactate starts increasing exponentially is termed the lactate threshold. And this point has been shown to be affected with training. So essentially, as shown in this picture right here, the blood lactate threshold can be increased in trained individuals, whereas it's lower in untrained individuals. So in trained individuals, they can work out for longer before it starts to accumulate and starts to feel the effects of fatigue caused by the blood lactate. When exercise stops or intensity decreases, other metabolic pathways do take over because oxygen becomes available again, and they're no longer needed to essentially recycle this lactate and use it as a fuel source. When strenuous activity continues for an extended period of time, like I said, the Cori cycle cannot go on forever. So the energy requirements of the muscle will exceed the capacity of the Cori cycle, and it will result in a condition known as lactic acidosis. This is an accumulation of lactic acid in the system and causes the blood pH to decrease, which can cause tissue damage. The symptoms are outlined in this picture right here, so things like headache, muscle weakness, any sort of nausea or vomiting, increased heart rate, or shortness of breath. There are other physical conditions that can cause lactic acidosis, and those can include things like heart disease, severe infection, HIV, cancer, short bowel syndrome, excess acetaminophen use, chronic alcoholism, and stated before, intense exercise. So you may have noticed I've been using the term lactate for most of this. That's because the body can produce and use lactate. However, many people use the terms lactate and lactic acid synonymously, but there is a difference. The difference is purely chemical. Lactate is essentially lactic acid missing one proton. So when lactic acid donates a proton, it becomes lactate. And the body can only use lactate. It cannot use lactic acid in the Cori cycle. So I'm going to go through a few myths surrounding lactate and lactic acid that people throw around in the fitness industry. The first one being that the burn during exercise is caused by lactic acid buildup. Like I said, this is a myth. Essentially, when ATP is broken down, hydrogen ions are released, and our body can't keep up with breaking down the hydrogen ions fast enough, and it is the buildup of these ions that makes the environment acidic, causing the burning sensation in our muscles. The next myth is that lactic acid is a waste product. As outlined earlier, the Cori cycle kind of proves this wrong. Research has indicated that 75% of lactate is used and recycled as fuel. Like I said, the glucose gets broken down in the muscles, producing lactate. The lactate gets transported to the liver, which then gets transformed back into glucose, where it can then be used as fuel. And this happens for 75% of lactate. The third myth is that lactic acid builds up and causes muscle soreness. Again, this is false. The lactate in our body is flushed from our system in about 30 to 60 minutes following activity, and 75% of it is used as fuel. The delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, is actually caused and is the result of microtrauma in the muscles and connective tissue causing inflammation. So it's not the lactic acid, it's actually the activity, so the lifting weights or the going for a run, that causes that soreness, and not the lactic acid. So hopefully that helped clears things up about the fate of lactate in our body. These are the sources that I used, and that's all I have. Thanks.